Hi, it's Dave. Welcome to my channel, My Yard Sale. Today I'm going to talk about a couple things. First, I'm going to talk about current events, what happened around here that's exciting in the last couple of days. Second, I want to talk about my health and just kind of update my subscribers on just how things are going on with my health. And then third, I want to talk about what it was like to grow up in Florida. So first off, current events. We had a snowstorm or a snow squall come through my area last week that dropped probably, I don't know, 2 or 3 inches of snow. But more than that, it dropped a layer of ice on the whole area that shut down the whole area where I live. Like nobody had power for probably 10 hours. I don't know how that even happens. How does the power company not able to turn the power on in the freezing cold in 10 hours? I don't even know. I can't even imagine. But so we were out of power. I was out of power for 10 hours. It was about 18 degrees outside. It was warm enough to not freeze to death, but it was pretty comfortable getting under 10 pounds of blankets to get into bed at night. And it was pretty uncomfortable being in the house with it being so cold. So I'm glad that's gone, and we've had some sun and some winter weather out the door. Goodbye. Some warmer weather in the area a little bit. So now the driveway is now I can see the driveway again, which is kind of nice. It sucks when you can't see the driveway. Um, so that was current events. The this I'm just happy. I'm gonna be so happy when winter's done and summer gets here. I won't be complaining about how hot it is this year. I'll be enjoying the warm weather. So my health has been kind of interesting. It's like I can feel the muscle groups in my body. I feel like they're bulking up, and I got to weigh myself again because I haven't weighed in a while. But I can feel like my biceps and definitely my thighs and my calves. I have to stretch them out pretty regularly, or it's very uncomfortable. So I'm constantly stretching out. I stretch out probably 5 to 10 times a day just to try to keep the muscles stretched out and keep them from being uncomfortable. And so my eyesight gets a little bit better and worse depending on how much water I'm drinking. Hydration is definitely making a big difference, more so now than it did even before. And I'm actually eating quite a bit more. I'm eating a lot of beans. I eat so many beans now. I eat beans and vegetables, and I eat some beef. I had to add beef back into my diet because I just couldn't get full and stay full without having beef in my diet. So I cook I cook it in a big pot. I cook 2 pounds of frozen vegetables, peas, carrots, and corn. I cook usually one or two or three even big old sweet potatoes in with it, and then I'll cook in like a pound or 2 pounds of beans. But boy, if I take that meat out, I just cannot seem to. I eat like 5 times of the beans. I eat 5 times a day. I can't get full without the meat. So I cooked another batch this last week, and I added more meat, and I'm happy eating that. It tastes good, and the meat seems to fill me up. But my body's still having this weird thing of the muscles just feeling so tense and uncomfortable. But I'm happy that for the most part, the snaps in my bones are mostly gone. And I hope that is out the door and done. And I'm hoping that this whole thing with the uncomfort of my muscles, I'm hoping this is the next step in progressing towards getting better and not getting worse. I mean, I'm happy that I'm feeling better and not worse. That's a positive thing. So, next, I want to talk about what it was like growing up in Florida. And so, again, I'm in upstate New York right now. I've lived here for 20 years. And I'm just going to be honest and say it was the worst decision I ever made. I lived in Florida. I lived in the place where everybody in the world goes on vacation. And that's where I lived and grew up. I grew up as a kid, as a small kid, living on the east coast of Florida. And then eventually my family moved to the Orlando area. So I grew up in the Orlando area way before Orlando was as big as it is now. It was, I mean, of course, every place has grown up more since then, but back then it was a much, much smaller town. Mostly it was all people that had moved down from New Jersey and New York. Actually, it's probably more the same now than it was even 5 or 10 years ago. My grandparents moved down from New Jersey and New York, and I'm not sure exactly why they moved. I know that they were enjoying the warmth down in Florida, that's for sure. My grandfather always had a boat, and as a kid, we always went out on the boat, going out on the lakes and going out on the boat. I mean, water skiing was exciting when I got older, but as a kid, I didn't need that. I would sit in the front of the boat and I would just sit out there and we would go, dart around the lake and enjoy being out in the boat and getting some sunshine. I'll never take the sunshine for granted again. I remember as a kid just constantly having a tan and sometimes being sunburnt, but I was never freezing cold. I don't even remember ever wearing a coat or wearing a hat or gloves. I don't know that I ever owned gloves as a kid. I know I had a coat only because when I was very young, I fell into my grandfather's pool with a coat on and I couldn't swim at that time. So when he came out and found me, I was floating around the pool and my coat was keeping me above the water. Thank goodness for the coat. But I don't ever remember wearing a coat, a hat, or gloves, which I got to tell you is pretty awesome as a kid. You just focus on staying out of the sand spurs and whose house you're gonna run to and go play with. I loved growing up in that Orlando area. It was nice. There was plenty of things to do. We would go to the local mall to go see the fireworks. My whole family lived in the area, so that was pretty nice. And I'm sure that there's just as nice places everywhere else in the U.S. But I have to admit, the weather in Florida, like it being chilly in the winter, but never cold, and then it being hot in the summer. And I get that it's hot in the summer in Florida, but quite frankly, the pools get warm in the summer. You get in the pool, it's very warm. Then you get out of the pool and you go inside where there's air conditioning, and you're totally cool and refreshed for the rest of the day. You can't really do that where I live. If you go outside, you can freeze to death. And then you come inside, and even though the heat's on and it's like warmer, still doesn't feel warm. You still end up wearing long johns and flannel lined pants and these kind of thick like coat shirts inside your house. Um, Anyways, so growing up in Florida was the best ever. And then of course there was always the theme parks. You could go to Disney or Busch Gardens or any of those places, which I didn't go to as much as a kid. I didn't appreciate that as much as maybe some other people do. But they were always there, and we went every now and then. The best part was going to the beach. We would go to the inlets, and my parents would go fishing, and I would go to the beach, and I would knock around in the water for an entire day, all day long. And of course, you have to be very careful because there is predators in the water. You have to be careful of that. As a kid, I didn't care about that, but there's like undertows, and there's things where the way the tide is, it'll pull you out into the water. As a kid, you learn how to avoid that pretty quickly. As a kid, I never worried about alligators or snakes ever. And I grew up in areas where there was lots of lakes and there were alligators around. You could see them around. But they didn't, for the most part, chase things down. And I didn't know of any kids that ever got attacked. I think that alligators didn't really start attacking until people started feeding them. And then they started eating things like cats and dogs and all the other stuff that they got a hold of. Then they started attacking people and things. But as a kid, I never ever remembered even any shark problems or any alligator problems or even snake problems. I never remembered any of that. Now I see it every time I look at Facebook or on the news. There's always news things about these huge alligators. I don't know where the heck these alligators come from or where they're going, but some of these things are massive. And clearly, they didn't start off that big. They got that big by eating the things that they were either being fed or the things that they chased down and ate, which I can appreciate that. But a lot of those alligators get big because they're fed. Anyways, but so growing up in Florida was amazing. The weather was amazing. You didn't have to overdress. You didn't have to you couldn't really underdress. There was always good food. You had the beach on both sides of Orlando. You had you had places to go and do things like parks. You had the springs, the ice, the very cold, icy, the Aquifer Springs are pretty amazing, and I do remember going to those once in a while. So when I grew up in Florida, I was a very small kid, and then I eventually moved away and I went to Denver. And if there's any interest, I'll talk about what it was like for a Florida kid, a little skinny Florida kid moving to downtown Denver, as you know, in the second grade. I'll talk about that if there's any interest. It was actually kind of interesting. It turned me into the person that I am. Um, so I don't really have anything else to say about Florida, except for my grandparents that were from New Jersey and New York. When they moved down to Florida, they bought a house outside of the Orlando area that had a little bit of property. So they had a whole bunch of orange trees. We had orange trees that were like the very best kind of orange trees, navel oranges, Valencia oranges. They had the very best oranges, and tangerines, tangelos. They had all kinds of citrus trees. There was probably like 20 trees in their backyard, and we would eat oranges all year long. And anytime anybody came over to our house, they would always leave with a paper grocery bag full of oranges, and they were the best oranges ever. They're so good. You can't go anywhere up north and get oranges like you can fresh off of a tree in Florida. It's amazing. So that was a very, very high point in the day, is to go out and pick some oranges. As long as you could weave around all the dog turds that were in the yard, because we had a couple of dogs at that time. Or my grandparents had a couple of dogs. If there's any questions on this post, I'd be more than happy to answer any of these. Do me a favor and leave it below. If this seems interesting to you, I'll be adding more content similar to this outside of just, what's going on outside in the world and my health. I'm trying to add more life health, or more life story instead of just health. If this is interesting to you, do me a favor, give me a thumbs up. And if you want to hear more information like this, subscribe. And for those of you that have subscribed, man, I so appreciate it. And the comments, I look forward to responding to some of these comments. Thank you so much, and I really appreciate it. And I hope you have a great day. Bye-bye.